Hello! If you're wondering where you are, you're following Grandma. As usual, I'm in my wee cottage in Scotland. Today the sea is far out and the rocky shoreline's visible. There are a couple of cormorants perched on the outcrops. They're easy to identify with their long necks and hook-tipped beaks. Occasionally one will lazily stretch out its wings to dry in the wind. This is quite important for the birds because their wings aren't waterproof. I have a pair of binoculars here beside me in my study, and I like to watch the birds as they pose in such a dignified manner on the rocks. They live on fish which they catch when they're swimming. I recently read that in China, a traditional way of fishing is to have a tame cormorant with a snare around its neck. This prevents the cormorant from swallowing big fish, but allows it to take small ones. Here in Scotland, the cormorants are left to get on with their lives, and our local fishermen continue their traditional ways of catching lobsters and crabs and smoking the local haddock on racks over wood-burning fires in huge black ovens. If you're lucky enough to get an Arbroath smoky straight out of the smokehouse, you're in for a real treat. Holding the whole fish in a greaseproof wrapper, you use your fingers to peel back the hard, smoked skin and discover inside is a perfectly cooked, warm, succulent white fish. No wonder they have a worldwide reputation. Another unusual food that's gaining popularity is seaweed. Last year, my daughter and I went on a seaweed foraging expedition in Fife. Here, different types grow healthily on the rocks, away from any pollution, and they have a daily wash as well from the North Sea. That's when I first met Rory McPhee, a qualified phycologist. In ordinary language, that's a seaweed expert. Rory's knowledge was fascinating. He introduced us to the different types: rax, sea lettuce, dulse, carrageen, sea spaghetti. And he explained how each one had a season when it could be harvested, just like earth-grown plants. I'd never considered that seaweed was seasonal. My first experience of seaweed was as a child on the beach in Lancashire. There was one type that had small grape-like pods. If the seaweed was partly dried, we'd try to pop the pods and spray each other with salt water. The other type I remember was dark green, slimy and yucky, and it often clung to the iron breakwaters on the beach. More recently, when I was scuba diving in the Caribbean, I had even closer encounters with seaweed. On several occasions we swam through forests of kelp, with small colourful fish darting in and out as if they were playing peekaboo from behind a swaying mass of soft green curtains. At times the kelp seemed almost threatening, and I remember being relieved to swim out of the mass of swaying fronds into the clear turquoise sea. But I never thought of it as food. I now know that a few brave souls do actually swim in the UK to collect some types of seaweed, but I'm definitely a warm climate diver, and as far as I was concerned, foraging in Scotland was definitely a paddling in waterproof boots only adventure. So we left wetsuits at home, put on warm clothes, thick socks and Wellingtons, and ventured out. It was a great day. It was good to learn that all UK seaweed is safe to eat, but, as you might imagine, some taste better than others. We learned how to harvest it, cutting it cleanly and not pulling it off the rocks so that the plant itself remained intact and continued to grow. The basic rule for eating seaweed is, if in doubt, dry it out. And most seaweeds dry easily and can be reconstituted. Rory had plenty of suggestions on how to dry it at home, store it and use it in cooking. As the day unfolded, I discovered that Rory was also an experienced and enthusiastic forager on dry land too. He described hunting in the countryside for wild foods such as berries, mushrooms, herbs and plants. But what was more jaw-dropping was learning he'd lived off-grid in the middle of a forest overlooking the River Tay in the Kingdom of Fife. He slept in a cosy yurt, had cooking facilities. He'd built several weatherproof timber outbuildings and even installed a cast iron bath. The bath was over a pit, which he fills with logs, and once enough rainwater has been collected, he lights the log fire and the cast iron bath heats the water. I wonder if he ever invited people over. It was a great day on the North Sea. We collected 10 types of seaweed: dabilox, red dulse, kelp, sea spaghetti, egg rack, that's a little bit like capers, truffle weed, delicious, and pepper dulse. Then there were the racks: bladder rack, serrated rack, and egg rack. But I think my favourite is sea lettuce, which is bright green and so delicate. A few hours later, as the tide came in, we retreated up to the shoreline and headed for home with our bags of fresh seaweed ready for drying and some adventurous cooking. We crossed the Tay Bridge back into Angus, and as we were passing the Moniki fruit farm, we saw the big signs for fresh picked strawberries. We couldn't resist. Our local farm strawberries are outstanding. Sweet, succulent and luscious. Nothing like supermarket fruit. I'll tell you more about them later, but right now it's back to seaweed. At home, over the next few days, we dried the seaweed ready to store it. We improvised and we were quite ingenious. We hung the bigger varieties on washing lines and extending hangers. We used dishes in the airing cupboard and very, very low temperature in the fan oven for the more delicate types. Whilst that was drying, I started to experiment and cook. My fresh sea bass wrapped in sea lettuce and cooked gently in butter was worth a Michelin star. Another day I substituted the sea lettuce with dabilox, a superb triumph. The kelp looked tough and forbidding, but it wasn't. The trick is to hold it firmly at the top with one hand and then tear it down into tagliatelle-like strands. Then cook it gently in butter on low heat with red pepper, wild garlic, mushrooms and cream. Quite delicious. The seaweed dried out quite quickly in the sunshine, and when it was hard, I stored it in airtight containers. I also bought a small spice grinder, and I pulverised the dulse, and now have small pots of a seaweed condiment that I sprinkle on soups or scrambled eggs. Quite yummy, and very healthy because it's packed with iodine. I could go on. It's such an exciting and flavoursome discovery. And in a later podcast series, I'm going back to interview Rory and some other specialists and foragers who live around this coast. However, this isn't a podcast about cooking, but about the amazing range of food that grows here. This part of the county where I live is called the Gold Coast. Here, the rich, fertile land faces south, slopes down to the sea, soaks up the long hours of sunshine, and the crops just grow. Fields of potatoes, cauliflowers, courgettes and kale, polytunnels filled with strawberries and raspberries, fields of blueberry bushes, and of course, wild food like chanterelles, wild garlic, blackberries and tayberries. Hundreds of years ago, Arbroath was covered in orchards which belonged to the abbey. Arbroath Oslin apples were famous, but sadly all the trees are gone. Or they were, until recently an initiative involving children and young people has led to Arbroath Pippin's community orchards being planted throughout the town. Some have as many as 27 trees. The Oslin apples are growing again, and there are even apple days. The children love it. I wonder what the monks would think if they came back and saw their pippins today. Angus really prides itself on the food it produces, and I love the fact it's seasonal. It's high quality and often organic, and we now have a regular Arbroath farmers market each month in Victoria Park, which is an open green space given by a philanthropist in the last century for the enjoyment of the citizens of Arbroath. It has the North Sea on one side and the cliffs as a perfect backdrop. It's a fabulous setting. Here you can find artisan bread, local honey, wild venison from the glens, and punnets of freshly picked berries, seasonal vegetables, Dirty carrots are my favourite, all different shapes and sizes with a light coating of the rich soil, hence their name, dirty carrots. Then there are local whiskies, pastries, haggis and mountains of sweets. Scotland loves sweets. There's one called tablet, and when I first arrived in Scotland I joined a gym and I was getting changed when a stranger approached and asked me if I'd like to buy tablet. For a moment I thought I was being offered drugs, and then realised the woman was raising money for a local charity and offering me the sweetest concoction, tablet. I discovered it's made from sugar, condensed milk and butter, and these are simmered together, and when it's cool you can break it into squares. It's wicked and Moorish. This week I tried their ginger and chilli tablet, and that really had an amazing kick. The farmers' market is an example of how individuals can make a difference in their community. Ours was started almost a decade ago by Morag, a committed and energetic woman who's worked tirelessly, managed to get support from townspeople, councillors and most of all local producers. The result is a market that continues to grow, has a great buzz and attracts people from all over Scotland. I love their mission statement. We run Arbroath Market to provide an event to enjoy, to create a place for community spirit and for meeting old friends and new. It's worth repeating, food is a big part of life here. Meat eaters' eyes glaze over at the thought of an Aberdeen Angus steak. And in the winter, venison stews and game slowly simmer in ovens, surrounded by freshly harvested carrots, root vegetables and plenty of local potatoes. This part of Angus is called the Gold Coast because the fields face south and produce rich crops. In early spring, rows and rows of fresh polytunnels are put up and planted with strawberries. And when we see the polytunnels, there's a feeling of optimism that the dark days of winter are nearly over and soon there'll be more daylight hours and warmer weather. As the weeks go by, the berries grow safely inside the tunnels, protected from sharp frosts. They continue ripening until in June, July and August they have up to 17 hours of daylight and are bursting with flavour and ready to eat. Scottish strawberries are renowned as some of the best in the world, and in early summer the ripe berries are carefully picked and many are sent down to Wimbledon for the famous strawberry and cream tea. The flavour of Scottish strawberries changes over the weeks as the different varieties ripen. El Santa, Symphony, Cambridge Favourite, Albion, Rhapsody and Camarosa. June is definitely berry season in Scotland. We have bright red raspberries picked off the canes, and when it comes to names, they too can compete. Autumn Bliss, Tullamean and Glenample. Then there are blackberries, tayberries, gooseberries, and on 2 weekends of the year we can go and pick our own blueberries. Much of this fruit is turned into the most delicious preserves. We even have a specialist jam factory, Mackay's, so the fruit doesn't have to travel far. When you next buy your jam, whether it's in Morrison's or Fortnum & Mason's, it's worth checking. If the berries are from Angus, it'll definitely be good jam. Because of the weather, sometimes the growing season and the harvest can be unpredictable. However, you can usually rely on the asparagus grown at Easy Farm, which is near Glamis Castle. That's where Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, lived. It's usually a 6-week season, and the Patullo family personally grade and bundle the spears before they're dispatched. Again, I discovered there are different types of asparagus. Some are thick, some are thin, some are green, and some creamy white. It's all delicious. I always put the dates in my diaries and place an order because it's become well known in foodie circles and they sell out quickly. There are many charities connected with food, but one especially dear to me in Arbroath is Hope, a small organic garden started by a local GP, Cedric Devoyle. Over 30 years ago, he recognised the signs of stress and mental ill health in many of his patients and decided to do something about it. His vision was to establish an organic garden where, in a safe environment, individuals could be helped by working in a purpose-built garden. Once they were accepted as a trainee, people could stay as long as they wished. In addition, Cedric's vision was to have a small on-site shop which would supply the community with the healthy organic produce. Over the years, hope has been a lifeline for people, whether they were physically disabled or had a mental illness. And for the wider community, there's been the opportunity to buy fresh, organic vegetables, salad, herbs and fruit and see hope in action. I'm a trustee of Hope, and I know it hasn't always been easy. Funding and running charities can be challenging. But the vision of one doctor 30 years ago and his commitment with other like-minded people has changed so many people's lives. Cedric's now retired, but he still keeps an eye on Hope and shops there regularly. Like Morag and the farmers' market, he's an example of how individuals can make a difference in their community. Last year, Hope celebrated its 30th birthday, a small and beautiful success story. When you're surrounded by problems, as well as looking for solutions, it's important to identify opportunities. A decade ago, the farmers' market enthusiasts identified a way of helping small producers and people struggling to find customers. They worked against all the odds, particularly during the pandemic, and the market is steadily growing. Last month, I chatted with several stallholders who told me it's one of the best food markets around. The steadfast approach of the organisers and the community spirit this has grown is admirable. At a time when we're all facing big challenges or change, observing the quiet, supportive action of others may be a comfort or even inspire you. Some of the people in this town have certainly given me real food for thought. The cormorant is still stretching his wings and observing the ocean from his rocky vantage point. He'll soon be off to his nest for the night. The oyster catchers are on their way home. The sun is setting over the signal tower, and the sky is ablaze with slashes of orange and crimson. It's time for food. Fresh haddock cooked in a little butter with new potatoes and mint picked freshly from my garden. Meanwhile, keep following Grandma.